That's one avenue. The next avenue I think that's really actually exciting is that this whole idea that corporations are people and thus entitled to free speech rights to spend in an unlimited way to buy elections, that whole idea is predicated on state incorporation laws. So, right, so like the court says, okay, states under their incorporation laws, they treat corporations as the same as people, and therefore we have to operate from that. In Montana, luminaries from both parties are pushing a ballot measure. It says, well, if that's the case, then can't we go back to doing what we used to do, which is changing our incorporation laws and saying that we grant corporations this, and this power, but we don't grant them this, and this power? We used to do that as a country all the time, that states granted corporate charters, and anybody who studies the law knows that corporations are artificial entities created by states. That is like technically what a corporation is. So human beings have rights. Corporations have powers. It's an important distinction. And so what they're proposing to do in this Montana ballot measure that should be on the ballot in 2026 is say corporations have all the same powers that they've had, except for one power. They can't spend in elections. Now, people may be hearing this and saying, well, okay, fine, like some company's going to go, reincorporate in Delaware and then come back into Montana. But here's the thing. Every state's corporate code says that out-of-state corporations have to play by the same rules as the corporations in states, inside the state. So the point is that Montana can't solve the problem for Colorado, can't solve the problem for New York or California, but Montana, if it passes that measure, can solve the problem or begin solving part of the problem inside of Montana.
Yes. Yeah.
And so here's the thing, they're going to the ballot for that in Montana because their Republican governor and legislature would never pass it. But blue states right now could pass the same thing. And I want to be clear. I don't think it's a cure-all. Like billionaires would still be able to individually spend money. This is about corporation spending, corporate spending. But billionaires would be forced to spend their money through official political committees, which require disclosure, right? Because this would apply to nonprofits as well. So I think there's something really important and innovative going on. Yes, would there be a Supreme Court challenge to this? Yes. But the Supreme Court has repeatedly ruled that state incorporation laws are what determine what powers corporations have. For the Supreme Court, and I'm not putting it past them, but for the Supreme Court to try to thread a needle and undermine something like this, they would have to really dismantle parts of corporate law that I'm not quite sure the Supreme Court wants to dismantle, right? So
right,
that's
and they've also made. I mean, the case law makes the distinction clearly that there is a difference between citizenship and so-called legal personhood. The legal personhood that is applied for corporation, applied with the motivated reasoning that you talk about, but it was applied, and they talk about it as a useful legal fiction, which creates oxygen or the ability for lawyers to make the case to the Supreme Court that if it's basically a vehicle for these cases to be heard or whatever, then the legal fiction that their rights can be abridged in a way. Like there is a roadmap.
I go back to the idea, the distinction between rights and powers.
Yeah.
We as human beings under the Constitution have rights. Corporations are granted powers. They are artificial entities. And to get into the weeds about it for one sec here, it makes sense. A corporation gets things that we as human beings do not. Corporations get limited liability. If they go bankrupt, if they break the law, the people who are running them in many cases are shielded from themselves personally going bankrupt, at least under the law, right? The point is that states extend that special privilege, and they used to, in exchange for, we're going to grant you some powers, but not other powers. And again, this used to be relatively routine, 100 years ago, and states never gave up that power. So to me, that is really exciting. Now, the final